At my husband's memorial dinner, my daughter-in-law leaned in so close I could smell her jasmine perfume over the lilies. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "You'll be out of this house by tomorrow," she hissed, letting the words slip beneath the clink of silverware and the soft hum of condolences. I kept my gaze on the candlelight trembling in the crystal. "Is that so?" I murmured, lifting my glass so the room wouldn't see my hands shake. Across the table, my son, her husband, adjusted his tie and pretended not to notice. Aunt May dabbed her eyes. Pastor Green's voice floated from the far end. "To Richard's kindness." Plates slid over linen. The roast was going cold. I felt the sharp ridge of my wedding band press into my palm, and with it came 42 years of breakfasts, hospital visits, mortgage payments, and a garden my husband had coaxed from Clay. She tapped the rim of my glass with one manicured nail. "Pack quietly, Mother. I'll have the locks changed before noon." I turned. "Thank you for the notice," I said, as if she'd told me the forecast. Her eyebrows arched, surprised I didn't crumble. I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking, marking the exact second I decided to stop being gentle with people who mistook gentleness for weakness. I rose and touched my spoon to the glass. "To family," I said. Conversations stilled, faces lifted. "To the memories we keep, and the promises we honor." I let the word promises land between us like a card face down on green felt. She leaned back, lips curved. "By tomorrow," she mouthed. I smiled, finally meeting her gaze. "By tomorrow," I agreed. "If you're here for the whole truth, how a woman who'd buried her husband at noon raised her glass at 6 and took back her life, follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. Because what my daughter-in-law didn't know, as she planned my eviction between bites of overcooked roast, was that I'd been preparing for this moment longer than she'd been in our family. I was 65 years old when my world shrank to the size of the dining room at that memorial dinner. For decades, it had been bigger, our house with its wraparound porch, the little church down the road, the grocery where everyone knew me as Richard's wife. Richard was my anchor. Together, we built a life that looked ordinary from the outside, but was rich in the details only we cared about. The way he'd whistle while repairing the fence, the extra cinnamon he'd sneak into my morning coffee, the Saturday nights we'd sit on that porch and watch the cornfields darken. We had one son, Michael. He was bright, polite, and at least in his younger years unfailingly kind to me. But as he grew older, especially after he met Claire, things shifted. Claire was my daughter-in-law in name, and nothing more. From the moment she crossed the threshold, I sensed she viewed our home not as a place of warmth but as a rung on a ladder. She had the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and a voice that could turn sweet to sharp in the space of a breath. Richard tolerated her with the quiet patience he showed most people. "Give her time," he'd say, squeezing my hand under the table. I wanted to believe him, but little things piled up. She'd correct me in front of guests, rearrange the furniture without asking, complain about old-fashioned ways when I baked from scratch. Michael, blinded by love or conflict avoidant by nature, rarely intervened. The house itself was my sanctuary. It had been in our family for over 40 years, bought with the down payment Richard and I saved from working double shifts him at the mill, me sewing uniforms for the school district. Every corner told a story. The dent in the baseboard from Michael's first tricycle, the kitchen window that stuck on humid days, the oak tree out back where Richard carved our initials the summer before we married. When Richard fell ill, the ground beneath me started to crack. His illness was swift and cruel. Claire visited his hospital room often enough to be seen but always seemed to have somewhere else to be. She'd lean over him, her perfume cutting through the antiseptic, and ask questions about bank accounts or whether he'd updated his will. I tried to shield him from the stress, but he wasn't blind to her motives. After he passed, the house felt hollow. Michael suggested I keep things simple by consolidating accounts. Claire offered to help with paperwork, her eyes scanning every document like a hawk. I thanked her and declined. That was the first time she looked at me as if I were an obstacle rather than family. Still, I tried to keep the peace. I cooked Sunday dinners, tended the garden, kept my grief quiet. Claire began hosting more gatherings at the house, her friends, her family, people who didn't know Richard, didn't know me. I became a guest in my own home, moving silently between the kitchen and the sitting room, offering coffee, clearing plates. The week before the memorial dinner, I overheard Claire on the phone in the pantry. "Once she's out, we can list it," she said, her tone brisk. "The market's good right now. We'll split it our way." My stomach dropped. I knew then that whatever civility existed between us was a facade. At the dinner itself, I noticed the changes. My seat, traditionally at the head of the table, had been moved to the far end. Claire's mother sat in my place, wearing a jeweled brooch I recognized from a gift Richard had given me years ago, a gift that had mysteriously gone missing. The menu, usually my comfort food, was catered. All sharp cheeses and rare meats I couldn't eat. Every detail whispered that I was being edged out. But I stayed composed. Years with Richard had taught me the value of patience. There's a strength in holding your cards close, in letting someone think they've already won. Claire didn't know about the safe deposit box, or the lawyer who'd been our family's counsel for decades, or the letter Richard had written months before he died. She thought she was dealing with a grieving widow too fragile to fight back. She had no idea that while she was planning my departure, I was already considering the best way to ensure she'd regret underestimating me. And then, in that quiet moment between toasts, she leaned in with her threat, "You'll be out of this house by tomorrow," and sealed her own fate. In the days leading up to the memorial, I kept my movements quiet but deliberate. I sorted through Richard's study, dusting the mahogany shelves and straightening the stacks of old ledgers. Most of them meant nothing to Claire, but I knew which drawers stuck because Richard had hidden something inside. That's how I came across the manila envelope creased at the edges, my name in his handwriting across the front. I didn't open it then. I didn't need to. Just feeling the weight of it told me it was important. Claire must have sensed I wasn't as malleable as she hoped. She'd started making subtle changes around the house, swapping out family photos for ones of her own friends, boxing up my china set and sliding it into the attic without mentioning it, moving the rocking chair from the porch to the garage. "It's outdated," she'd said when I asked. Outdated, that was her favorite word for anything that predated her marriage to Michael. Michael, for his part, seemed to live in a fog. He worked long hours, came home tired, and when I tried to talk to him, his answers were clipped. "Claire's just trying to help, Mom," he'd say, as if help was the right word for dismantling my life piece by piece. I began to notice her staging certain moments. One afternoon I walked into the living room to find her on the phone, speaking just loud enough for me to hear. "Yes, she's still here. No, I haven't gotten her to sign yet." She glanced at me, her lips curling into a half smile before she stepped outside to finish the call. Still, I kept my tone light whenever we crossed paths. I brought in roses from the garden, baked the oatmeal cookies Richard loved, and offered her tea in the evenings. It wasn't kindness anymore. It was strategy. I wanted her to think I was oblivious, that I hadn't connected the dots between her sudden interest in the property and her growing impatience with my presence. The memorial dinner was her stage, but she underestimated how closely I watch people. I saw the way she angled herself toward guests, lowering her voice to share something confidential. I noticed the flicker of triumph when she seated me at the far end, as though proximity to the head of the table could somehow crown her queen. And when she leaned in with her whispered eviction notice, she thought she was delivering a fatal blow. But I'd already rehearsed my expression in the mirror, a calm, almost amused smile, the kind that says, "I know something you don't." She believed I had nowhere to go, nothing to stand on. She was wrong on both counts. The will wasn't the only document in my favor, and she wasn't the only one who knew how to play a long game. By the time dessert plates were cleared and coffee was poured, my mind was already moving to the next steps. I would let her think the threat had landed, that I was shuffling quietly toward the door. In reality, I was preparing to invite her to a very different kind of dinner, a gathering where she wouldn't be the one holding the knife. And that night, I decided exactly how to make her see that some promises, once broken, can never be repaired. The days after the memorial dinner began like the slow turn of a screw, small, deliberate, and always tightening. Claire didn't push me out with one grand gesture. Instead, she chipped away at my place in this home, one careful insult, one subtle removal at a time. 2 mornings after the dinner, I climbed the stairs from the kitchen to find my bedroom door open. Claire never left doors open. She was meticulous about her house rules. Rules I had never agreed to but was expected to follow. My pulse quickened as I stepped inside. The faint scent of lavender polish her scent, not mine, lingered in the air. My quilt, the one I'd hand-stitched while carrying Michael, was folded neatly on top of a cardboard box against the wall. The framed wedding photo of Richard and me that had always sat on my nightstand was gone. Claire appeared in the doorway, cradling a mug of coffee. "Morning," she said brightly. "Just making some space. Michael thought you might want to start packing." I wasn't aware I needed to," I replied, forcing my voice to stay even. She smiled, tilting her head in mock sympathy. "It's easier if you start now. That way it's not a rush when the time comes." She turned and walked away, her perfume trailing after her like a smug signature. I stood in the center of my room, feeling the walls press in not because of the missing items, but because she had stepped so easily into a place that was mine. 3 days later, I went into the pantry to retrieve flour for a batch of bread. My neatly labeled glass jars, flour, sugar, oats, had been pushed to the back shelf, replaced by boxes of protein powder, energy bars, and gluten-free pasta. "What happened to the flour?" I asked when she walked in. "It expired," she said, not looking at me. "You're welcome." Her tone was clipped, like she was doing me a favor. No apology, no offer to replace it. Just the assumption that her way was better, that my way was obsolete. I let it go, though my fingers tightened around the pantry door until my knuckles went white. The sharpest cut came in the garden. It was late afternoon, the air thick with summer heat. I went out to water the roses. Richard and I had planted the summer after Michael was born, only to find the soil raw and jagged, the trellis leaning against the fence. The bushes 25 years old were gone. Claire stood on the porch, phone pressed to her ear. "Landscaper said they were diseased," she called down, covering the receiver with her hand. "We're going for a more modern look." I couldn't answer. My throat had closed around the sight. Those roses had been more than plants, they were living. Memories of mornings spent side by side with Richard, knees in the dirt, hands in the soil. She hadn't just removed them, she'd erased them. That night, I dreamed of the garden as it had been lush, fragrant, alive, and woke to the cold reality that nothing was safe from her reach. I tried speaking to my son. One evening, I caught him in the garage while he was tightening a bolt under the hood of his car. "Michael," I began, "Claire's been making changes without asking me. Things that matter to me." He didn't look up. "She's just trying to make the place her own, Mom. You've got to understand. This is our home now, too." "Our home." The word stung. "And where does that leave me?" "We'll figure something out," he said, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes sliding away from mine. In that moment, I realized he wouldn't protect me from her. Not out of malice, but because it was easier for him to stay silent. A week later, I pulled into the driveway to find a sleek black sedan parked in front of the house. A man in a blazer stood beside Claire, clipboard in hand, gesturing toward the porch as he jotted notes. "What's going on?" I asked as I got out of my car. Claire's smile was smooth. "Just a realtor friend. Michael and I are exploring options for the property. The market's hot right now." "Options for what?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned to the man and said, "We'll talk numbers later." I walked past them without a word, heading straight for the hall closet where I kept a small tin box. Inside was the key to our safe deposit box, a key Claire didn't know existed. I slipped it into my pocket, the cool metal calming me. That night, I sat at my bedroom window, looking out at the dark silhouette of the yard where the roses used to be, and I knew I was nearing a breaking point. The following Sunday, the house was already filled with the smell of garlic bread when I came downstairs. Claire's parents were sitting at the table, glasses of wine in hand, laughing at something she had just said. My usual seat at the head of the table was already taken by her mother. No one offered to move. I carried out an apple pie, still warm, the crust golden and fragrant. Richard had always said my pies were his favorite part of Sunday dinners. I placed it on the counter to cool, intending to serve it after the main course. "Don't bother cutting it," Claire said as she passed through the kitchen. "We're having cheesecake tonight." "It's already made," I replied. She smiled without warmth. Some traditions should end, don't you think? From the dining room came the sound of her parents' laughter. I slid the pie back into the fridge, my hands trembling not from weakness, but from the effort it took to keep them still. That night, I sat alone in my room. The manila envelope was still tucked in the drawer, its presence like a heartbeat I could feel but not yet face. I traced the edge of it with my fingers, hearing Richard's voice in my mind. Don't let anyone take what's yours. The next morning, I went to the laundry room to find my clothes piled in a plastic bin. The closet space I'd used for decades had been cleared. Claire stood beside the washer, folding a stack of her dresses. I needed more room, she said casually. You can keep your things in the garage for now. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My own clothes exiled to the garage like they didn't belong under this roof. I carried the bin upstairs without a word, each step heavier than the last. Later that week, I returned from the market to find the locks on the back door changed. The new brass glinted in the sunlight. When I confronted Michael that evening, he said, Claire wanted better security. Better for whom? I asked. He didn't answer. The final blow came on a Wednesday morning. I went into the den to find my sewing machine gone, the table bare except for a vase of artificial flowers. It had been my companion for years, the tool I used to make clothes for Michael, curtains for this very house. Sold it, Claire said when I asked. No one uses those anymore. I stood there, looking at the empty space, realizing she wasn't just moving me out. She was erasing every trace of me from this home. Piece by piece, she was rewriting its history so that I was never part of it. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the porch light flicker in the wind, thinking of the roses that were gone, the quilt boxed away, the pie untouched. I thought of Michael's silence, of Claire's smirk at the memorial dinner, certain she had already won. Around midnight, I opened the drawer and took out the envelope. My hands shook not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to confirm. Inside was a letter from Richard, written in his firm, deliberate hand. If you're reading this, something has happened. You need to know the house is yours, and no one can take it without your consent. See Harold, he has all the documents. I read it twice, the words sinking in like the first steady breath after drowning. Harold had been our lawyer for over 30 years. Claire had no idea he even existed. I placed the letter back in the envelope and set it on my nightstand. Tomorrow, I would call Harold. Tomorrow, the rules would change. And as I lay down, the tightness in my chest eased not because the fight was over, but because I finally knew I had the means to win it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices downstairs. They weren't the low hum of casual conversation, but the clipped, purposeful tone of people making plans. I stayed on the stairs, out of sight, and listened. She'll be out soon, Claire was saying. I've already spoken to a moving company. If she doesn't leave on her own, we'll have her things boxed by the end of the month. A man's voice, Michael's, responded. Let's not make it ugly, Claire. She's dragging her feet, Claire snapped. The longer she's here, the harder it will be to get a good offer on the house. We need to move fast. I went back to my room, each step deliberate. There was no more pretending I hadn't heard, no more hoping for decency. I was listening to my own eviction being planned like a home renovation. That afternoon, she brought in a stack of glossy brochures from a real estate office. She left them fanned out on the coffee table, each one showing houses with words like modern, minimalist, and move-in ready. Thought you might want to look, she said as I passed through the living room. I picked up one brochure, glanced at the asking prices, then set it back down without a word. That evening, she hosted a wine night with 2 of her friends. I stayed upstairs, but the sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted up through the floorboards. Around 10, I went down for some water and found the remnants of the evening spread across the kitchen island, empty bottles, half-eaten cheese plates, and my good linen napkins stained with red wine. Hope we didn't keep you up, Claire said, leaning against the counter, cheeks flushed. We were just talking about how nice it'll be to have the place to ourselves. It was the first time she'd said it outright, in front of me, without the veneer of politeness. I went to bed that night with the letter from Richard under my pillow. It was no longer just a document, it was armor. But even armor can feel heavy, and the weight of it pressed on me in the quiet hours. I thought of how far things had fallen. The woman who had once been welcome in her own kitchen, now sneaking downstairs for a glass of water. The mother who had once been the center of her son's world, now a problem to be solved. On Friday, I walked into the garage to find several cardboard boxes stacked neatly against the wall. My name was written on them in black marker. Inside were my winter coats, my sewing supplies, and framed photos of Richard and me that had hung in the hallway for decades. "Thought I'd help you get a head start," Claire said when she saw me looking. I stood there for a long moment, running my fingers over the glass of one photo our first Christmas in the house. Then I closed the box and pushed it aside. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, I sat at my desk and dialed Harold's office. His secretary answered, her voice warm and steady. I told her my name, that I was Richard's widow, and that I needed to see Harold as soon as possible. She said he could fit me in Monday morning. I hung up and looked around my room, the last space that still felt like mine. In 48 hours, I would have the proof in hand, the leverage Claire didn't know existed. And as I blew out the candle on my nightstand, I couldn't help but smile. Claire thought she was clearing the board. What she didn't realize was that I still had the winning piece, and I was about to put it into play. Monday morning arrived gray and cool, the kind of weather Richard used to call thinking weather. I dressed with care, not out of vanity, but because I wanted to walk into Harold's office looking like a woman who still belonged to herself. A navy skirt, a cream blouse, the pearl earrings Richard had given me on our 10th anniversary. The drive into town was quiet. The streets were slick from last night's rain, shopkeepers rolling up awnings, the bakery letting out the first warm scents of bread. I parked in front of Harold's building, a sturdy brick structure with green shutters that hadn't changed in decades. Harold greeted me in the lobby himself. He'd aged since I last saw him, more silver in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but his handshake was still firm, his voice steady. "I'm sorry about Richard," he said, guiding me into his office. "He thought the world of you." "I know," I said softly. "That's why I'm here." We sat at a polished oak desk that looked like it had never seen clutter. Harold pulled a manila folder from a drawer. "Richard left explicit instructions for me. He wanted to make sure you were protected, no matter what happened." He opened the folder and slid several documents toward me. The first was the deed to the house in my name alone. The second was a copy of the will, updated just 3 months before Richard's death. In it, he had left the house, all associated property, and a significant sum from his life insurance directly to me. There were no shared claims, no vague clauses. I traced my finger over the bold print, sole owner. "She can't touch this," Harold said, reading my thoughts. "Not without your written consent, and I'd advise you never to give it." "She's already talking about selling," I said. "She's had a realtor in the yard." Harold's mouth tightened. "Then it's time she learns the truth." He handed me another document, an irrevocable trust Richard had established for Michael and any grandchildren. The trust was substantial, but it was airtight. Claire could never access it directly. "This is the second piece of your defense," Harold explained. "If she thought she could control Michael through money, this will put an end to that." "I'm Seth." I sat back, letting the weight of it settle in my mind. Claire had been playing checkers, moving pieces for quick gains. Richard had been playing chess, thinking 3 moves ahead. "I want to confront her," I said. "But I want to do it in front of people who matter to her." Harold's eyes glinted. "Then you'll need a setting where she can't spin the story. A family gathering, perhaps?" "I can arrange that," I said. We spent the next hour outlining every detail. Harold would prepare certified copies of the documents. I would invite Claire's closest allies, her parents, a few of her friends, to a family update dinner at the house. She would walk in expecting to finalize her victory. She would leave knowing she had none. When I stepped out of Harold's office, the air felt lighter. I tucked the folder into my bag and walked down the street to the bakery. I bought a loaf of the crusty rye Richard loved and a small box of lemon tarts. As I carried them to the car, I imagined serving dessert at that dinner, the sweet tang of lemon cutting through the bitterness that had settled over this house for too long. Back home, Claire was in the living room, flipping through one of her glossy home magazines. She barely looked up. "You were out early," she said. "Just running errands," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Her eyes flicked to the folder in my bag but didn't linger. She had no idea that inside it lay the undoing of every plan she'd made. Over the next few days, I went about my routines as if nothing had changed. I cooked breakfast, tended the small herb garden that had survived her modern renovations, folded laundry. But beneath the surface, every move was calculated. I called her parents and told them I wanted to host a dinner to discuss the future of the family home. I could hear the curiosity in her mother's voice. On Thursday evening, I caught Michael alone in the garage. "I've invited your in-laws for dinner Sunday," I said. He frowned. "What's going on, Mom?" "You'll see," I said, and walked away before he could press further. That night, I set the table in my mind where each person would sit, where Harold would stand when he presented the documents. I pictured the moment Claire's confidence cracked, the way her voice might falter when she realized the house, the money, the control she thought she had, all of it was beyond her reach. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. Sunday afternoon, I started cooking early. Not because I needed the time, but because I wanted the smell of roasting chicken, rosemary, and fresh bread to drift through every room. Comforting, familiar scents that belonged to me, not to her. I polished the silver, set the table with the good china Richard and I had chosen together, and ironed the linen tablecloth she'd once called too old-fashioned. Every detail was deliberate. If Claire thought this was just another dinner, she would be lulled into complacency. By 4 o'clock, Harold arrived. He wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather briefcase. I led him to the study and closed the door. "Everything's here," he said, tapping the briefcase. "Certified copies, notarized and in order." "Good," I said. "When the time is right, I'll give you the signal." We heard the crunch of tires in the driveway. Claire's parents. I took a steadying breath and walked to the front door, greeting them with polite warmth. Her mother glanced around the house, as if measuring it for the life she imagined her daughter would have. Not long after, Michael came home from work. He kissed me on the cheek, looking puzzled but saying nothing. Then Claire swept in, late as usual, wearing a fitted dress and that same jasmine perfume she'd worn at the memorial dinner. She kissed her mother, embraced her father, and offered me a smile edged with curiosity. "Big night?" she asked, hanging her coat. "Just family," I said. We sat down to dinner. Conversation was light at first, small talk about the weather, about a new restaurant in town. Claire dominated, as she always did, directing questions to her parents, making side comments to Michael. I kept my eyes on my plate, waiting. When the main course was finished and dessert plates were being cleared, I caught Harold's eye. He gave a barely perceptible nod and reached for his briefcase. "I appreciate you all being here," I began, my voice calm. "There's been some discussion about the future of this home. I thought it would be best if we addressed it together." "I know." Claire's eyes flickered. "I don't think—" "I'll let Harold speak," I said, cutting her off. He opened the briefcase and laid out the first document, the deed. "This home," he said, his voice clear and professional, "is solely and irrevocably owned by Mrs. Bennet. It is not, and has never been, subject to any joint claim." A flush rose in Claire's cheeks. That's not possible. Michael and I—" Harold placed the will beside the deed. Updated 3 months before Mr. 239. Bennett's passing. All associated property and assets are left to his wife with no encumbrances. Additionally, there is a trust. He produced the final set of papers. For Mr. Bennett's son and any grandchildren. The terms are airtight. No funds may be accessed or redirected by anyone other than the trustee. The room was silent, except for the faint tick of the grandfather clock. Claire's parents exchanged uneasy glances. Michael stared at the documents, his expression unreadable. I folded my hands. I wanted everyone here to hear this at the same time, so there would be no misunderstanding. This house is my home. I will decide if, when, and how it changes hands. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time since she'd entered my life, she looked unsure. I pushed my chair back and stood. "Coffee, anyone?" The meeting wasn't over, not yet. But the balance had shifted, and everyone in the room could feel it. I poured the coffee slowly, giving Claire time to collect herself, or to think she was collecting herself. In truth, she was floundering, and I could see it in the way her fingers tapped against the rim of her cup. When I returned to the table, Harold was packing the documents back into his briefcase. Claire's mother broke the silence first. "Well, I suppose that clears things up," she said, her tone measured but edged with embarrassment. Claire finally found her voice. "Michael, say something," she demanded. Michael looked at me, then at Harold, then back at her. "What do you want me to say? The papers are clear." Her eyes flashed. "You knew about this, didn't you?" He shook his head. "Number, but maybe I should have." The weight of his words hung in the air. Claire's parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the clock seemed to tick louder, marking each second she sat there without an ally. I set a plate of lemon tarts in the center of the table. "Help yourselves," I said lightly. "It's a family recipe." Claire's father took one. Her mother hesitated, glancing at Claire, who sat rigid, her hands in her lap. I leaned forward just slightly, lowering my voice so that it was firm but not sharp. "Claire, I don't intend to make your life here impossible, but I will not be pushed out of my own home. That ends tonight." Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Then Harold, with the timing only a seasoned lawyer could manage, cleared his throat. "One more thing," he said, pulling a smaller envelope from his briefcase. "Richard asked me to hold this until after the reading of the will, in case any disputes arose." He slid it across the table to me. My name was on the front, in Richard's handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a short note. "For the day you need to remind yourself who this house really belongs to." Beneath the note was a photograph Richard and me on the porch, the roses in full bloom, the house standing proud behind us. I held the photo where everyone could see it. "This is the home Richard built for me, and it will remain mine until I decide otherwise." Claire's gaze dropped to the table. Her shoulders were stiff, but the fight in her eyes had dimmed. For the first time, she looked less like a woman in control, and more like someone realizing she'd overplayed her hand. I stood, gathering the plates. "Shall we have dessert in the sitting room?" No one disagreed. As we moved, I caught Harold's eye. He gave a small nod, the kind of nod that said, "You've won this round." But I knew this wasn't the end. Claire would lick her wounds, plan her next move, and I would be ready. Because the moment she whispered that threat at Richard's memorial, she'd set a game in motion she could never win. The air in the sitting room was heavy with unspoken tension. Claire sat on the edge of the sofa, her knees pressed together, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. Her parents took the armchairs opposite, trying to look relaxed but betraying themselves with the way their eyes darted from me to Harold. Michael hovered by the mantel, silent, caught between the woman he'd married and the mother who had raised him. I set the tray of coffee and lemon tarts on the low table, taking my time, letting the moment stretch. Claire hated silence. She thrived on control, on steering the conversation. Now, every second I didn't speak was a second she had to sit with her loss. When I finally sat down, I didn't look at her first. I looked at Michael. "You've lived in this house your entire life," I said quietly. "Your father and I built it together. Every corner of it tells our story." "Deck." Michael nodded, his eyes dropping. "Your wife," I continued, "has been making decisions about it without me. Decisions about my belongings, my garden, my privacy. She has invited strangers to appraise it. And she has told me to my face that I would be out by tomorrow." Claire shifted in her seat. "That's not exactly—" "It's exactly what you said," I cut in, my voice sharp for the first time all evening. "And you said it at your father-in-law's memorial dinner." Her mother's eyes widened. Her father frowned. Claire turned to Michael. "Are you going to let her talk to me like that?" "I'm going to let her tell the truth," he said, surprising us both. That small crack in her armor was all I needed. I reached for the folder Harold had left me and pulled out a single page. "This is the deed to the house," I said, holding it up. "It's in my name. Always has been. No one sells it, rents it, or changes it without my consent." Her mother cleared her throat. "Well, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I said. "Just a plan that didn't work out." Claire's voice rose. "You think you've won because you have a piece of paper? You can't stop us from moving forward with our lives." "Your lives," I said, leaning forward, "will not be funded or housed at my expense. And just so there's no confusion," I laid down the second document, The terms of the trust. The money your husband will inherit is locked in a trust for him and any children you may have. You will never have access to it. The silence that followed was almost physical. Claire's face flushed deep red, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her father shifted uncomfortably. That seems rather restrictive. Richard designed it that way, I said evenly. He believed in protecting his family. All of them. And 7. Michael's gaze was on the documents, but I could see the realization settling in that the house, the money, the history here, were beyond his wife's reach. Claire pushed her chair back suddenly and stood. You think you're so clever, but you can't keep me out of everything. I stood too, meeting her at eye level. No, I said. Just the things that matter. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she turned sharply toward the door, grabbing her coat. Her parents followed, murmuring awkward goodbyes. When the door closed behind them, the house felt bigger, as if it had been holding its breath and was finally able to exhale. Michael stayed by the mantel, silent. I didn't press him. Tonight wasn't about winning him over, it was about drawing the line so clearly that no one could pretend not to see it. The evening should have ended there, with doors closing and lines drawn. But houses hold echoes, and mine carried one more voice I hadn't heard yet. Michael's. He stayed by the mantel a long time, staring at the photograph of Richard holding him as a boy, both of them grinning at the camera, cheeks sunburned from a day in the yard. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I didn't know about the trust, he said. You weren't meant to carry that weight while your father was sick, I replied. He wanted you to grieve as a son, not calculate as an heir. Michael nodded, rubbing his jaw. Claire won't take this well. She already hasn't, I said. But there's a difference between not taking it well and refusing to accept it. He let out a breath that sounded like a confession. I should have stepped in sooner. Then start now. Before he could answer, the front door opened without a knock. Claire stepped back into the foyer, her coat thrown over one arm, her hair slightly disheveled as if she'd been pacing outside. Her mother hovered on the porch behind her, but Claire didn't look back. She walked straight into the sitting room like someone reclaiming a stage. We're not finished, she announced. I didn't rise. Then sit. She didn't. You think you've boxed me out with paperwork and speeches, but I know things too. She turned to Michael, her chin lifted. Tell her about the account. Michael stiffened. Claire. The account you opened when your father got sick, she pressed. The one you didn't tell Mommy about. I watched my son's face drain of color. My hands stayed folded in my lap. What account? Michael swallowed. When Dad was in and out of the hospital, I opened a separate savings account. For medical costs, emergencies. I didn't want to complicate the household budget or add stress. You didn't tell me, I said. He met my eyes. I was going to, but then Claire said it would be better to wait until... He stopped. Until things settled. And creased. Claire smiled, thin as knife edge. There. Not everything is under your control. Where is the money now? I asked. In the account, Michael said quickly. Untouched except for deductibles and prescriptions. I can show you. Claire's smile faltered. That's not true. It is, Michael said. And for once he looked like his father, steady, unflinching. And I'll prove it tomorrow. Her eyes flickered. The first blow had missed. She regrouped. Fine. Maybe the account won't save us, but influence will. She produced her phone and swiped to a photo, holding it out so we could see. A snapshot of me standing with the realtor in the yard, taken earlier that week when I'd stepped outside to ask him to leave. From the angle, it looked like I was listening attentively, even approving. I sent this to 3 people already, she said. Aunt May, Cousin Linda, Pastor Green's wife. I told them you were planning to sell the house and boot us out, that we were trying to make peace, and you blindsided us with a lawyer. Her smile sharpened. By morning, everyone will know what a hypocrite you are. It was a clever move, weaponize the court of public opinion, turn me from victim to villain. I felt the old ache of wanting to be believed, the reflex to explain. But I didn't move, and I didn't plead. Is that your strategy? I asked. A photograph without context and a story without facts. People believe what they see, she said. Then let them see. I replied. All of it. I stood, crossed to the secretary desk beneath the front window, and unlocked the top drawer. From it, I took a black notebook, my ledger of household expenses from the past 2 years. Receipts tucked inside. Notes in pen. Dates, amounts, signatures. I set it on the low table and opened to a page marked with a ribbon. This is the day you changed the locks. Here are the invoices. Here are the texts asking me to move my clothes to the garage. Here is the landscaper's bill for ripping out the roses. And here, I flipped another page, are the screenshots of your realtor's texts about getting the old woman out before we list. Color rose in her cheeks. You've been spying on me. I've been keeping records, I said, because people believe what they can verify. She glanced at Michael, maybe hoping for rescue, but he was studying the ledger like a man counting a debt he'd ignored too long. This is bad, Claire, he said quietly. She lifted her chin. You don't scare me with notebooks and deeds. You're alone. I felt something steelier than anger settle in my chest. No, Claire, I'm not. The doorbell rang. She startled. I didn't. I'd sent 3 invitations that afternoon. Michael opened the door to Pastor Green and his wife, both still in their coats, surprise softening into concern when they saw our faces. You asked us to stop by, the pastor said to me. You said it was important. Thank you for coming, I said. I thought it might be helpful to clarify a story that's already making the rounds. Claire's head whipped toward me. You called them? I did, I said. And Aunt May. And Linda. I gestured toward the hall. They'll be here shortly. You wanted an audience, Claire. Let's give them the full performance. Her mouth opened, closed. For the first time that night, I saw fear. Please, Pastor Green said gently. Tell us what's going on. I laid the deed and the will on the table, then the trust summary on top. I summarized in plain language. No flourishes, no sting, just facts. When I finished, I lifted the ledger. And if anyone wonders what the last months have been like under this roof, the record is here. We don't need to read her diary, Claire snapped. It's not a diary, I said. It's accountability. We all heard the car doors, then multiple. Footsteps. Voices. Aunt May and her husband shuffled in, followed by Linda and her teenage daughter, still in a soccer hoodie. They were breathless, apologizing for the late hour, until they saw the papers on the table and the pallor in Claire's face. It's true, Aunt May said before anyone asked. I got the photo. I thought the worst. I sent it by mistake, Claire blurted. It wasn't meant to. That's a lie, Michael said, and his voice carried a weight that stopped Claire mid-sentence. He looked at me. Mom, if you'll let me. He turned to our small audience. My wife has been pushing to sell the house. She's changed locks, moved my mother's belongings, brought in a realtor, and told my mother she'd be out by tomorrow. She sent that photo to make my mother look like the aggressor. It's not true. None of it is. And the room expanded around his words. It wasn't just that he sided with me, it was that he finally said it out loud. Claire's composure cracked. You're choosing her over me? I'm choosing what's right, he said. And you should too. Silence fell. Even the tick of the clock seemed to pause. This was the place most confrontations end. The villain exposed, the family murmuring, the audience satisfied. But I had promised myself more than exposure. I had promised myself security, so I took a breath and delivered the first twist. Claire, I said, you and Michael will not be sleeping here tonight. Her eyes flashed. You can't throw us out. I'm not, I said calmly. Michael can stay if he chooses. You cannot. A collective gasp. Claire staggered as if pushed. On what grounds? On the grounds of a temporary no trespass notice, I replied, holding up a folded paper Harold had left with me, signed, dated, and enforceable under our state's property laws for sole owners. You're not on the deed. You have engaged in harassment and attempted coercion regarding the property. You are no longer welcome on these premises until we agree on rules that protect me from further harm. You'll call the police on your own family? She spat. I will call the police to protect myself, I said. Family doesn't make it legal. It makes it painful. She looked to Michael again, but he didn't move toward her. He stood where he was, hands in his pockets, the ledger at his feet. Claire's mother stepped forward, voice trembling. "Claire, let's go." "I'm not going anywhere," Claire said, then froze as another figure filled the doorway. Harold, back again, this time with a uniformed community liaison officer he'd phoned on his way home. Not a full arrest. Not a spectacle, just presence. Measured and quiet. "Evening," the officer said. "We're here to keep the peace. I understand there's a notice to be served." Harold handed it over. The officer read it, nodded, and faced Claire. "Ma'am, you've been informed. You'll need to leave for tonight." Claire's breath hitched. She looked small then, the way a person does when the world finally tells them no. She grabbed her coat and moved toward the door, then stopped one last lunge. "You think this is over? You think a piece of paper will protect you?" "It already has," I said. "And there's one more you should hear about." She blinked. "What?" "The trust," I said, and turned to Michael. "Tell her about the trustee." He swallowed, then found his voice. "It's not me," he said. "Dad named Mom the trustee." Claire stared at him, then at me. "You control everything." "No," I said softly. "I steward what your husband's father left for his family. If you want a place in it, start acting like family." The officer shifted, ready to escort. Claire's mother tugged her sleeve. The foyer swallowed them. The door opened to night air, and they were gone. I waited until the house settled, until the guests had gathered their coats, until Harold assured me the notice would hold for 72 hours and could be renewed if necessary. Only then did I sit, the ledger closed beneath my palm, the deed a quiet weight beside it. The room was almost empty when Michael sank onto the sofa across from me. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "You don't have to fix it tonight," I replied. "You just have to stop breaking it." He nodded, weary, ashamed, but somehow lighter. And in that space, small, fragile, real, the second twist began to unfurl. Not from me, but from him. "I need to tell you something else," he said, voice rough. "About Claire, about why she was so desperate to sell." I waited. "She's in debt," he said. "A lot of it. Some of it before we were married. Some of it after. I didn't know how bad until last month." I felt the floor steady beneath my feet. Motive, pattern, proof. "Then we'll need documents," I said, "and witnesses, and a plan." He nodded. "I can get them." "Good," I said, and the line of battle shifted again. Just a degree, but enough. "Mom," he added, eyes shining, "I'm sorry." "So am I said. "But sorry isn't the end of this story." I looked at the ledger, the deed, the photo on the mantel. Tomorrow would be for filing motions, tightening boundaries, and tracing debts. But tonight, in my own house, I allowed myself one quiet victory, a room where the truth had been spoken out loud. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, warm and gold, as if the house itself was trying to ease the edges of the night before. I sat with a cup of coffee, the ledger open, reviewing the last entries. Michael came in, a manila folder in his hand. He set it down beside my cup. "These are the statements," he said. I opened the folder. Inside were bank records, credit card statements, and payment notices, some from luxury retailers, others from travel agencies, all in Claire's name. The balances were staggering. Tens of thousands owed, with interest stacking like bricks on a collapsing wall. "She hid most of this," Michael said. "I didn't know until the calls started coming to the house. And she wanted the house sold to cover it," I said, not as a question. He nodded. "If she got access to the sale money, she could pay off everything and walk away clean." I closed the folder. "Then she's not just manipulative, she's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes." We didn't have to wait long. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Aunt May. "Have you heard? Claire's been saying you set her up." My thumb hovered over the screen. A setup? If she wanted to play the victim, she'd chosen the wrong day. I called Harold. "It's time for the rest of the family to hear everything," I told him. "All of it." He arranged a slot for Wednesday evening at the community center neutral ground, a place where half the town had attended potlucks, fundraisers, and the occasional tense homeowners meeting. Word spread quickly. Curiosity is a currency in a small town. and Claire had been spending it lavishly for months. When I arrived with Michael and Harold, the room was already half full. Claire was there too, sitting with her parents in the front row, her expression fixed in something between a smile and a challenge. Harold began with the basics. The deed, the will, the trust. No one interrupted this time. Claire knew better. Then he stepped aside and I took the floor. I asked you all here because there have been stories, I said, my voice steady. Stories about my intentions for this house, my relationship with my son, and my treatment of my daughter-in-law. You deserve the truth. I placed the manila folder on the podium, opened it, and lifted the first statement. These are records from the last 18 months, all in Claire Bennett's name. I read off the balances one card after another, each number heavier than the last. A murmur rippled through the room. She didn't owe this to me, or to Michael, or to this house, I said. But she saw this house as a way to pay for it. That's why she pushed to sell. That's why she tried to force me out. Claire shot to her feet. You had no right to. I had every right, I said, cutting her off. When someone tries to take your home, you have the right to defend it. And when that person tries to do it by lying to your family, you have the right to tell them the truth. Her mother's face had gone pale. Her father leaned forward, his jaw tight. Claire, I continued, you've told people I'm vindictive, controlling, unwilling to share. But you've been the one making secret plans, changing locks, moving my belongings without consent, and spreading stories to turn people against me. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Last night, you were served a no trespass notice. That stands. And as of this morning, the trust that holds Michael's inheritance has been amended to require my co-signature for any withdrawal until our grandson turns 18. I let that sink in. That means the security you wanted for yourself now belongs entirely to the next generation. Claire's eyes widened. You can't. I already did, I said, with Michael's agreement. Michael stepped up beside me, facing the room. I made mistakes, he admitted. I let Claire make decisions without thinking about the consequences. But my father left this house to my mother, and it's staying that way. If anyone hears different, it's a lie. The murmurs grew louder. A few people nodded. Someone in the back muttered, "About time." Claire turned on her heel and strode toward the exit, her parents scrambling after her. She didn't look back. When the door closed behind them, Harold leaned toward me. That, he said quietly, was checkmate. A boat. But I knew better. Claire wasn't the kind to accept defeat quietly. She'd retreat, regroup, and find a new angle. The difference now was that she'd be doing it without access to my home, my resources, or the goodwill she'd once enjoyed in this town. I stepped down from the podium, feeling the weight of the last few months shift lighter now, but still present. Some wounds don't vanish with a single victory. They heal in their own time. As people came up to shake my hand or offer quiet words of support, I caught Michael's eye. There was shame there, yes, but also something steadier. Resolve. We walked out together into the cool evening, the community center's lights casting long shadows behind us. I didn't know what Claire's next move would be, but for the first time, I felt ready for it. Because no matter how many times she circled back, I had what she didn't. The truth, the law, and the will to use both. In the days after the meeting at the community center, the house felt different. Quieter, yes, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that comes when a storm has passed, when the air is still heavy but the danger has moved on. Claire didn't come back. The no trespass notice held for its 72 hours, and by the time it expired, she had moved in with her parents across town. Word spread quickly. Small towns don't need much to keep a story alive, and this one had legs. People who had once smiled politely at her in the market now turned away. Some were cold, others curious, but few offered sympathy. Michael stayed at the house, though we both knew it wasn't a permanent arrangement. He was quieter these days, his confidence stripped back to something raw and honest. In the evenings, we'd share coffee at the kitchen table, not saying much but letting the silence be an unspoken agreement. Trust had to be rebuilt, and it would take time. The debt documents Michael had brought me went to Harold. Within a week, formal notices were sent to Claire's creditors, making it clear the house and trust were untouchable. She would have to face her debts without using my property as a lifeline. It wasn't vengeance, it was boundaries. And those boundaries were finally holding. One afternoon, as I was pruning the herb garden, Claire's mother appeared at the edge of the porch. She looked older than I remembered, her posture more cautious. She asked me to come, she said, not meeting my eyes. To say, she regrets how it all went. I set the shears down. Is she asking to come back? She is. I shook my head. Number. Not now. Maybe not ever. She needs to understand this house is not a bargaining chip. It's a home. My home. Her mother nodded, as if she'd expected the answer. She left without another word. That night, Michael admitted Claire had been calling him daily. Some calls were angry, others tearful. I don't know what to do, he said. Do what's best for you, I told him. But don't let guilt make your choices. The weeks turned into a month. The rose garden Claire had destroyed was nothing but bare soil, but I had plans for spring. I'd already spoken to the local nursery about ordering new bushes white and red this time, planted in Richard's memory. One Saturday morning, Michael came into the kitchen with a large envelope. These came for you, he said, handing it over. Inside were the final certified copies of the trust amendments, the deed, and Harold's cover letter. I placed them in the safe deposit box key pouch, where they belonged. Feels permanent now, Michael said. It is, I replied. The permanence didn't mean the hurt was gone. Sometimes, walking past the empty corner where my sewing table had been, I felt the sting of loss. But I also felt something else, a steadiness I hadn't known in months. Claire had lost her chance to take the house. She had lost her standing in the family. And perhaps worst of all for her, she had lost the illusion that she could intimidate me. One evening, standing on the porch as the sun went down, Michael joined me. I'm thinking about selling the condo, he said, paying off what's left of her debts and starting over. Without her. I didn't tell him what to do. That choice was his, and I'd learned that advice from me, right now, might feel like pressure. I only said, whatever you choose, make sure it's because you want it, not because you're afraid not to. The house creaked softly as the night cooled. For the first time in a long while, it felt like it was breathing again. I don't know what Claire will do next. Maybe she'll fight to salvage her reputation. Maybe she'll try to worm her way back in. But the difference now is simple. She no longer has the power to decide my fate. Richard once told me, a home isn't just walls and a roof, it's the ground you stand your tallest on. And as I locked the front door that night, I realized I was standing taller than I had in years. If you were in my place after everything, would you let her back in? Or would you keep the door closed for good? Tell me in the comments.